September 14th of 2022. Finance Officer Kristen Bobzien, would you please call the roll?
Okay. Bueller. Here. Danforth. Here. Holine.
Here.
Paulson. Here. Shetty. Absent. Tupper. Absent. Billhauer.
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is established. Chair will entertain a motion to approve today's agenda. Motion made by Councilman Paulson, seconded by Councilman Bueller. Any conversation on that? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item A on the consent agenda is an approval of the council minutes from May 9th, June 9th, and 21st, July 7th, August 8th, and 15th of 2022. Do I have a motion? Move to approve by Councilman Bueller, seconded by Councilman Billhauer. Any conversation on that? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the council consent agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. On the regular agenda, we have two items. I have to approve the agenda. Chair will entertain a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, duh. Consent agenda. Okay, sorry. I knew that there was something going on in my head. Okay. Yeah, we can delete that, right? Okay. Tonight's regular agenda, item A, is a 2023 outside organization budget requests. For more information, we will go to our city manager, Amanda Mack.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm passing out a handout, and Heath, if you wouldn't mind pulling, yeah, for them, pulling it up on the screen. Oh, it's kind of small. I think so. Is it okay? Oh, yeah. Yep. So as I've mentioned several times, we have started the budget process for 2023 as part of our process to kind of streamline our conversations and in order to present on the 17th a comprehensive budget for your consideration. We're piecemealing this out a little bit. What you have in front of you are the requests that have been submitted to us from outside agencies. You'll see that there are not a lot of changes either requested from the organizations or recommended by myself and staff. I did list on there how we would be funding these, either out of the general fund or the third penny. Some of these would be newly funded out of the third penny. I think it's more appropriate for what those, did I miss something?
Councilman Billhauer just pointed out a little typo kind of sorts, but you have Beacon Center listed twice. The second Beacon Center should read the Watertown Boys and Girls Club, I imagine.
It should, okay. Yes. Sorry about that.
So that second one for the $240,000 as $247,000 request, $247,000 request is the Boys and Girls Club.
Correct.
Okay, sorry, that was the
Sorry about
chatter.
that. Got your picky. No, it was correct earlier.
I think Lisa was kind of concerned over there.
Yeah.
Beacon Center would have been very happy.
Right. Anyway,
okay. Back
to the conversation. We looked at, so the Art Walk, Volunteer Center, Art Walk, Cooking on Compesca, Historical Society, Millette Association, the CVB, and the Chamber of Commerce, we felt were largely promotional type organizations, which is what the Triple B fund is for. So it was appropriate to fund those out of the third penny and relieve a little bit of pressure on the general fund. We've typically only funded the Chamber and the CVB out of the third penny in the past, out of these outside organizational requests. Like I said, not a lot of change being asked for or being recommended. You'll see a slight increase to the Humane Society, a slight increase to the Boys and Girls Club. Just for those of you who may not be aware, we pay them monthly. We take the utility costs off the top, and then the remainder goes to their operations. So that increase is largely to cover the increase in utilities. You'll notice that the Chamber of Commerce, we're recommending an increase there. Prior to COVID, we were funding them at $90,000 a year. We kicked that back during the COVID years, and they've asked for us to just bring it back to where it was. The CVB requested an increase, and I'm recommending that we remain flat with them. They've gone through a couple of different directors in the last year, and I think this is an opportunity for them to figure out what their organization, what the work is going to look like over the next year. We can have more comprehensive discussions with them for the 2024 budget. I'm trying to see if I missed any other increases. There was a minor one with the HSA, $435, $535. I think they requested additional. So with that, I would stand by for any questions you might have. This really was just an opportunity to get this information in front of you, and unless there are any major objections or questions, we intend to include the recommended numbers in the budget for the presentation on the 17th.
Thank you very much, City Manager Mack. Chair will open it up for conversation, questions, comments from the council. Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you just, I guess, I don't know if we want to go line by line or not, but some of these, I guess, I just don't understand what the request is for, or where the money goes. I guess I would like to know, especially like the community band. I understand that they perform, but what is $24,750 going towards? I'm not saying I don't want to fund them. I have no idea what they're using almost $25,000 for, or.
Councilman, there's nothing wrong with asking that question at all, and that's why we're having the work session. So by all means, but if you could just highlight if there's anything other than, let's say, community band. Yeah, and I know, it's a good example, but if you could kind of be ready, but City Manager Mack, if you could explain.
Well, I am not going to be able to give you detail on the band specifically. They did not get their request in until later yesterday, I think. So the other organizations, when they submitted their request, they did submit a narrative on how the dollars would be used. So Cookin' on Compesca, for example, the $8,000 of that is to pay for usage of the park. So we charge them a fee to use the park for Cookin' on Compesca. The $10,000 out of the 18 covers promotions of the event, supplies, things like that. They try to keep the entry fee to get in, the ticket cost relatively low, so that they get a good turnout. So it helps supplement their expenses. The art walk, for example, the $5,000 that's requested is what it costs for them to participate in that. I can go into largely these dollars are for operational assistance for the organizations.
Councilman Paulson, we have Councilman Vilhauer and Councilman Bueller coming up after you, but if you had another specific line item that you wanted to ask about, I would give you the floor. Okay, Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. I think Manager Mack may have answered my question. We did get requests along with financial information from each of these organizations.
Correct. I'm trying to pull it up.
Okay, I guess that was my question. I know in years past we went so far as to have them come in and appear before a committee of the council to make their request. We haven't done that for several years, but we are at least getting some basic financial information to go along with their request.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, we are.
Okay. Can I ask who, was that your review, or is Finance Officer Bob Zine involved in that as far as reviewing financial information, or?
We both have looked at the requests as they've come in and have talked through what seems to make sense, what doesn't. Our largest conversation was around the request from the CVB to kick that up another $50,000. Like I said, they're going through some leadership changes, and before we commit to additional dollars, we needed to see what the value of that would be.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Bueller.
Thanks, Mayor. a similar question, Glenn. Who's the group that vets these organizations for the donation?
Kristen and I.
Just the two of you. Why did we get away from having any council intervention in deciding how we did this?
Well, this is the council participation in it. So here's what was requested, here's what we're recommending from a staff perspective, and you all get to make the decision on what's included in the budget or not.
Well, the reason I say, because in the past, we were privy to what their budgets were and what they had for restricted cash and unrestricted cash. And so we could make decisions along those lines. So I just wonder if we should have folks from the council involved in this process earlier on.
I'm not sure. We didn't do that last year, my first year. I wasn't aware that that was a process that was done or expected. I can certainly share out the information with all of you. I really treat it similarly to department requests. Like, even though they're outside agencies, we take their request and see how it fits into the budget and into the budget philosophy. And if it works, I don't necessarily see a reason to cut anyone from that perspective.
And then one other question, Mayor, if I might. Did we get a request from Men and Women Behind Bars? Is that a part of one of these
I've not
groups?
seen a request from them.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, question from my colleagues on the council. Could anyone recall exactly what year we stopped doing the external request presentations
I did it
to the council?
I did it a few years back. I don't know, it's probably been 5, 6 years ago, but I did it a year or two. I think, Mike, you might have been involved with some of that at one point, weren't you? Where we actually
Finance
interviewed.
Officer Bob Zine, you had a recollection?
I thought it was when, about that 2020 when COVID hit, is about the last time we stopped. But
I think I was the last one to sit in as a committee, and that was with Dan Albertson and Beth Manti. And I'd have to guess probably 18, 19, somewhere, 2018, 2019, somewhere in there. Now, I'll take that back. Mayor Steve Thorson was mayor yet the last time we actually had them come in for face-to-face interviews. I just recalled that now, because we made some recommendations to the mayor, and he nixed our recommendations and went with his thoughts anyway on it. And so anyway, for what it's worth, that might be the reason we stopped doing it, Bruce.
I will say, I think part of the thought behind the process is that with the new form of government, it's the city manager's recommended budget. So this is what I'm recommending as it relates to outside agencies and outside organizations. Again, you'll see this again when we get to the budget presentation. I've just had several ask what's going on with the outside organizations.
Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I would kind of second Bruce, and I would like to see a little more behind-the-scenes financial information on some of these. Not because, like I said, it's not because I don't think any of us are trying to deny these, but if they have an unreserved fund balance that's significant, we don't necessarily need to keep funneling money or pushing money to those organizations for year to year. If I don't know how to maybe word that 100% correctly, but I would like to see a little bit more information or the requests, especially if it includes an increase.
Councilman Danforth, did you have your hand up?
I don't, but I...
Well, we've got two that do. So, Councilman Bueller?
Yeah, I guess the question I have is it too late to be in the queue? If somebody had wanted to apply, is it too late at this point for this year's budget?
No, we won't make the final presentation until the 17th of October. It is going to be challenging to add things, but we can certainly entertain something else. I'm cautious to say that publicly because I don't need or want, 50, requests for funding, because we certainly can't do that. So I mean, if you've got a specific group that was intending to get something in,
Well, there is somebody I do have in mind, but I guess I just will make a comment, and that is that at some point, years back, I mean, there was a long list of folks that applied for these funds, and I think we sort of made a decision as a council, moving forward, we would support groups, organizations that might benefit the community, might subsidize another department, or might help out with police or fire or safety or health, all of those kind of things. So I think we've done a good job, but we've tried to keep it in the confines of groups that would help support city activities.
Councilman Vilhauer?
Thank you, Mayor. I would agree with what Councilman Bueller just said, too, as far as the groups that we tried to zero in on were those that we felt that are helping out or are saving us dollars in other areas. I mean, dive rescue is a good example, for example. So we have tried to limit it somewhat to those that, do help out with city services. I guess as to additional review by this body, I guess that's why I asked the question a while ago, who looks at this? And I'm comfortable with our finance officer and city manager of looking at these, and I don't feel like I need to be spending a whole lot more time, if any, looking at any more financials from them. It's just my one person's thought here.
Thank you. Any further comments from the council? Chair would have a question for City Manager Mack, and that would be, if someone from the council had a question and they wanted to do a deeper dive into one of these requests, they have the opportunity to do so now between the final presentation, at which point they could probably see these numbers. And
yeah, and I can forward out, everything that we've received. That's not an issue at all.
So, Councilman Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. And then I guess I do have a question on the Boys and Girls Club as well. I know it's a touchy subject. I don't want to go too far down that road, but does the funding for the Boys and Girls Club include all the utilities? Because that's where I don't understand. Is that still our facility?
So that $247,000 covers the utilities for that facility, and whatever is left after the utilities are paid out of the $247 is their contribution from the city. And we do have maintenance responsibilities there as well.
Okay, and I'm going to bring this up again because I think now is the time to do it. Why are we still responsible for a building we're not?
Because it is our building, and we have an agreement with them. There's a lot of conversations that happened before I came on board with the Boys and Girls Club. And it's my understanding that we attempted to make some changes to that a few years ago, and it largely ended in an impasse. And so here's where we're at. This is what we are committed to per the agreement we have in place with them. It may be worth another look at the agreement, but that's a much larger conversation than just an annual contribution to them.
Okay, and then one last question on that. Do we know what other surrounding communities do for the Boys and Girls Club? Is it similar?
We haven't looked at that. Kind of let that sleeping dog lie.
I don't have that information readily available.
That was a part of the information.
And part of the reason why I'm asking this is because I know that Aero Prep, and I don't know if that's actually directly associated with the Boys and Girls Club, but the Aero Prep, I heard, closed down. So I don't know if that affects some of this or not, but that does concern me.
Obviously not as a lawyer, but as a former board member and trustee, yes, the Aero Prep program closed down and was replaced by the diversion program, which operates the teen court and the juvenile references for in their, in lieu of going to court, they can go through the diversion program. So that the whole area that is now occupied by Aero Prep, or was occupied by Aero Prep, has now been converted to house the entire diversion program. So.
Council, any further comments or questions? Councilman Danforth.
I'm gonna make the same comment that I've made the previous 8 budgets that I've went through and dealing with this. And it goes back to the comment that Mr. Bueller made. And some years ago, and I was probably during the time of Mayor Thorson's tenure, where we had a conversation of really needing to sit down and define where and why we should be funding outside sources. Because we felt there was a lot of discussion about why are we using tax dollars back towards some of these requests. You know, is it right to tax people and then push their money back out in the community, or should the community just be taking care of them? Some of these fit into that category as far as I'm concerned again. I mean, there are some things that that without question are quasi departmental support items. I look at dive rescue, I look at the transit, I look at the Humane Society, that's an easy one. You know, Human Service Agency, because they do some things on our behalf there as well. So there's a number of these that fit that category, and then there's a number of them that really don't fit that category. And so this being my 9th budget, I'll state once again that I wish we were more aligned with a better definition of how we use taxpayer dollars going back to outside entities than what we are. And some of these, without question, in my mind, I would disagree with, but that's just a general comment. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman, let it be recognized that Councilman Tupper just arrived, and I will ask for any further comments or questions, and then I would also reserve the right as chair to come back to this topic if Councilman Tupper has a question later. But I also know he knows how to use emails and phone calls. So, Councilman, are you okay with that? Yeah. Okay. All right. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, we will close agenda item A, move on to agenda item B, a presentation and discussion on the City of Watertown's pavement management system. I believe for this, we will go to our Public Works Director, Heath Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor and City Council, Manager Mack. Tonight, we're going to talk through and give some information regarding the city's pavement management program, otherwise known as the pavement management system. If I could invite Justin Peterson and Rob Bannon to join me up here. They've helped put a brunt of the work into this data collection and this summary that we'll be walking through here this afternoon for the council. Really, the intent behind this is just to give a general understanding of how we program the streets that we work on year in and year out, how we select where we're doing our mill and overlays, our chip seals, our full reconstructs, and all those things. I think to the untrained eye, I'll call it, one might assume that we're just out there looking for bad streets and repairing them. But you'll find here through this discussion that there's a lot more that goes into it than just that. There's a pretty good level of technical data that we collect and we assess and that we analyze when we're programming our street repairs. That function, of course, is carried out in the Public Works Department primarily through the engineering and streets divisions. Engineering and streets collectively work together. The street maintenance side of things, of course, Rob Bannon heads up as the street superintendent. And then Justin helps me significantly with the engineering side as the assistant city engineer. And so hand in hand, we collectively use this pavement management data as a tool to program our street repairs. So with that, I'll give you a little bit of background here about what a pavement management system really entails. Now, I'll warn you, I took a full semester of pavement maintenance and rehabilitation in grad school. I'm not going to try to bore you with some of the details I could get into on this.
Well, everyone has crazy college stories, right?
So if I start to geek out a little bit, you'll understand why. But I do love the transportation component of civil engineering, and I know it, I like to think fairly well. I think my colleagues to the left of me also understand it fairly well, and the three of us together, I like to think, are a pretty strong team in how we program our streets. So with that, what this curve shows here is really the pavement life cycle of a street. And on the left axis, you'll see the pavement condition. And you pretend there's 100 up here. It's brand new, 100% condition, no flaws, no faults whatsoever. And then on the bottom axis here, you've got the pavement age. So as time goes on, that pavement deteriorates, its condition level starts to drop, and then you hit a breaking point here where if you don't perform any maintenance or rehabilitation efforts, it starts to significantly drop off, and in a short amount of time. And then before you know it, your pavement condition has dropped significantly. So that this really helps represent Pavement Management 101, is this life cycle curve and how plugging in our pavement maintenance treatments improves the longevity of our roads. That's really the goal here. We want to get the most out of our streets as possible. Pavement management, what is it? It's the process of planning, budgeting, designing, evaluating, and rehabilitating a pavement network to preserve the existing roadway structure in a serviceable manner. Now, what's that mean? We want our streets to last as long as they can, and we want it to be serviceable to the community, the traveling public that use them, the truckloads and truck traffic that function on those roads. It all has to function for the collective whole of the community. It is more effective to provide maintenance than it is to reconstruct. You'll see that in one of the next slides. A little bit of money up here to boost that pavement condition goes a long way in the longevity of the pavement and costs us a fraction of the price. The pavement management program is not necessarily based on worst first, but it's being intentional about selecting the streets that would have a greater cost if they're deferred. So once in a while, the community might see us working on a street and wonder, why are we fixing that street? This one over here is a lot worse than that one. Well, it might be because we can get a mill and overlay in on that street and save it for another 10 years rather than letting it go to pot, and that money's better spent in that scenario than it is to do a full reconstruct on a road that we've already lost, for example. This is that same chart, but with those maintenance applications applied. So again, you have a brand new pavement that starts to deteriorate over time. You're still within this target zone for pavement preservation, so you apply, let's say, a chip seal. Well, that's going to boost that pavement condition back up. Not all the way to 100%, but it's going to boost it up quite a bit. And then again, time goes on, it starts to deteriorate, and now you apply another surface treatment to that pavement. So on and so forth, and it helps prevent that pavement from dropping off quickly into the less desirable pavement conditions. This table here gives a little bit of data on how the pavements are rated. We use a term called the Pavement Condition Index, a PCI, and really it's a grading of the street condition. And that grading ranges from 0 to 100. I wouldn't directly compare it to the 0 to 100% grading scale that we use in our education system. Mainly because I think we all have a mindset there that, you know, if you're doing 70 plus work, you're probably okay. That's C's and better. I think most commonly people think of our grading system to think we're doing pretty good. Now on the pavement set scale, however, those averages are lower than that, and that's just how this system works. And we'll go into detail on what the averages are in our system and nationwide and what the industry standards are for these PCIs and the ranges that they are. But anyway, they're categorized into excellent, very good, good, marginal to fair, poor, and very poor conditions. And that gives, you know, a general or a relative remaining lifespan of the road as it falls into each one of those conditions. And then we have a little bit of information here explaining each one. How is that pavement condition index established? Well, it's through a system of assessments of the entire street network. In a later slide, I'll talk in detail about our pavement management system and how we've assessed it. But these are some general pieces of information here that what we're looking at when we rate our streets. These are all the different kinds of distresses that we look for. You have everything on here from alligator cracking to wheel rutting to longitudinal and transverse cracking, block cracking, patching. You know, every time we patch our streets, that's considered a distress of that roadway surface. It takes away from the quality and integrity of the original pavement. Pavement distresses are generally qualified under two different categories, structural and functional. The structural distresses are, one, similar to rutting. What that means is it's inhibiting the road and its load carrying capacity. The more structural failure a road sees means that it's simply not upholding the weight that it's seeing in truck traffic, and it's compromising the road quality, causing failure. Functional distresses are those that you typically see at the surface that really inhibit the usability of the street. These are the ones that we typically get most complaints on because they're most notable to the traveling public. Your potholes, sometimes surface friction's an issue. When it's raining out, the road could be slippery, things like that. So we try to keep those things in check as far as the functional distresses are concerned. This next slide goes through a few more of those distresses, you know, raveling, bleeding. This is a condition in the asphalt where the oil hasn't completely absorbed into the rock and the fines and the aggregate and the mix, so the excess oil bleeds out to the surface. So what that causes then is typically a slick spot in the road where you have surface friction issues, but also compromises the integrity of the asphalt as well. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory with potholes and edge cracking on here as well. So all those distresses get looked at, and then the street is rated using that pavement condition index from 0 to 100. What I've got here now is several slides of examples. We'll start at the worst first here. We have some very poor condition streets in town that require a complete reconstruct. This is an example of one of them down on 12th Avenue Southwest. Now again, there's a lot of factors that go into when we come in and reconstruct this. I think there are 2, maybe 3 homes on this street is all, very minimal traffic. So it might not be higher on the list than, say, a poor condition street like this one on 6th Avenue with dozens of homes traveling this street. This is actually one we're doing as part of the mill and overlay that's going on right now as we speak. But this is an example of a poor condition street. The PCI ranges from 25 to 40. Once it gets to this level, this is one of the last opportunities where you can do surface-based rehabilitation like a mill and overlay. Once you get past this level, you're typically dipping into a reconstruct of the roadway. The next level up would be a marginal classification, and that's a PCI ranging from 40 to 50. Again, this is where you can get into progressively thicker overlays as a surface treatment. You can see some alligator cracking in this road. This is 8th Avenue Northeast. But, you know, overall, still it's a drivable street, not in terrible condition. This is 20th Avenue Northwest up by the Lutheran Church up on the north end of town. Really, this street is not that bad, but you'll see right at the intersection of 2nd Street, there's a pretty bad spot here of some alligator cracking and raveling going on. So one fix to this would be a large patch to replace this. You can see that was done here in the recent past to the left of the screen. But that simple fix could then bump this street back up to likely into a good condition. So sometimes there are these isolated distresses in a street that takes just an isolated fix where we don't have to go in and mill and overlay the entire street or do an application for blocks on end, and it's just a localized repair that we can perform. An example of a good condition street, this one's First Street Northwest. Again, you can see some of the common cracking, but it's sealed up well to keep the moisture out. Pavement looks in otherwise pretty good condition. An example of a very good rating of a PCI to 70 to 85, this is Kemp Avenue East. Again, you see a little bit less cracking in this roadway surface, no alligator cracking, no other distresses to speak of. You can see the remnants of the chip seal and things on here that shows that we've been performing those maintenance treatments at an appropriate time in the life of the pavement. And an excellent road. Typically, these are your brand new streets. So 14th Avenue Northeast, if you recall here, just I think it was in 2020. This one blew up on us in the springtime. I had some terrible frost heaves that came through up there on 14th Avenue Northeast, and ended up having to rebuild or repave the half-street section that exists up there. So that obviously then falls into that excellent condition. A little bit of background on our pavement management program. This is that information I mentioned earlier on how we've established our pavement management data. We went into a contract with IMS, Infrastructure Management Services, in 2021 here to give us an update to our pavement management program. They reviewed and assessed 163 miles of streets. We had previously contracted with them back in 2015 through 2017. So in 2017, we got our first pavement management system report. This was right before I got on with the city, and it had a lot of good, valuable information at our fingertips when that report came to us. At that time, it was about 154 miles of streets that they assessed. Our current pavement condition index, they give us an average over our entire street network. This, I'll step back here a minute. What does IMS do when they assess our streets? They literally drive every street in town with a truck or a unit or a van with instrumentation on it that's taking video and roadway surface observations over the entire street network. And then they take all that data that they collect and they assess those conditions and rate them and build those pavement condition indices for each and every street in our town. They break those pavement condition indices out into segments. Maybe take 10th Avenue North, for example. They'll run a segment of blocks, particularly the reconstruct area we just did. Now that would be considered all one segment. It would have all one uniform pavement condition index. And they try to segment them out in a way that makes sense like that, so it's uniform and consistent throughout the city. So anyway, those pavement condition index scores are averaged throughout the whole network. Currently, with our 2021 update, we're sitting at a PCI average of 65. Now again, you go back, keep in mind of my analogy with our educational system, we think, it's a little below average, we could be doing better. But the national average for pavement condition indices is actually 60 to 65. So we're sitting at the top end of the national average of what other communities across the country have for pavement condition indices. In 2017, our PCI average was 62. So what's that tell us? From 2017 through 2021, we've gained some ground on our average. We've seen an uptick of 3 points on our pavement management scores. So that information is broken down a little bit further here. We talk about the percentage of excellent roads. That's that high-end PCI. Right now we have about 11% of our streets fall in that category. In 2017, it was only 4% of our streets. So again, we saw some great improvements in that category of excellent, which means we've done a lot of reconstruct from 2017 to 2021. Now, the inverse is true. We did see, we're still sitting in a good condition on what's known as the backlog. These are the very, very poor streets, either very poor or poor condition and need a full or partial reconstruct. We currently have 11% backlog. The industry standard is 15% or less. So we're still within a comfortable range of backlog. However, it did slip a little bit of the only 4% that we had back in 2017. Why is that? That's because the focus was placed up here. We were trying to get this, the percent of excellent roads built up. Well, that compromised the lower end roads not being worked on, so we slipped a little bit here, but still are keeping it within an acceptable range. I wanted to note that. So our good roads are getting better, and our poor roads are getting worked on and still within an acceptable range to keep this balanced out as much as possible. This is simply a pie chart that splits our roads out into those categories by percentage. You'll see that very poor percentage-wise is pretty much non-existent. There's a couple of them out there, but percentage-wise they're non-existent. Our poor streets, 11%, marginal at 13%, fair, good, very good, and so on. This is also distributed here in this bar chart. You can see a good distribution going here. We have a high level of very good streets at about 35% of our street network. Poor to very poor, again, the acceptable level of poor to very poor is up to 15%, so we're sitting good, keeping that tucked down below 15. The target for excellent streets, however, is up to 15, so again, we could be improving on that a little bit more. What do we do with all this data? Really what it comes down to is our budgets and the selection of our streets that we decide to work on year in and year out. And of course our budget drives which streets we can work on year in and year out. What the report does, and what IMS is very helpful in doing for us as well, is laying out these different scenarios. And these are some of them that are discussed in our report in 2021. So starting out at the bottom here, the top of the list, but the bottom of the funding, $1.86 million per year. What would that do to our street network? It would increase that backlog, those poor and very poor streets, up to about 15%, and our PCI drops from the 65 average it's at now down to 64. This is money spent year in, year out over the next 5 years is how this is projected. So you can see as you go down the list here, the more you spend, the lower our backlog remains, and the higher our PCI remains. So the number of bad streets out there is reduced, and the number of good streets out there is increased, obviously, is really the simplest way to look at that. One of the targets that they recommended in the report was about a $2.8 million per year funding for pavement management, maintenance, and rehab. What that does is it maintains the backlog at 11%. The poor roads stay about at the number they are now on average, and it increases that PCI even more. It goes up from 65 to 67. You'll remember the national average is 60 to 65. So this is a pretty good recommendation at a fair amount of money that's definitely within reach. And then you go a step further, and you could put a little bit more, quite a bit more money into that, almost a couple million more a year. That really knocks that backlog down to only about 8% of our roads into the poor and very poor condition. And it really increases that PCI. I mean, if you look at that, it takes us from a 67 up to a 74, which that'd be outstanding. If there's such a thing, it could be excessively outstanding. Where we're looking at streets of gold type scenario. That's not what this would be, but that is a remarkable average PCI is what I'm getting at, if we were to get to that point. This chart here really just puts these numbers into a table, into a chart that gives each one of them a line here to show you how the network average PCI increases based on those budget numbers. So again, just a handy tool that we as staff use when we're presenting budget recommendations and road work recommendations to the city manager and then subsequently to the council. What are our upcoming budget requests? Well, these are in a very draft format at this point, but at first blush, Justin has built in here some pretty good significant funding for what I would call pavement management program related projects. And the reason I'm specific with noting that is the mill and overlay, the neighborhood reconstruct, the large patches, the crack seal, chip seal, and fog seal, all those things are lumped into projects that help improve the pavement condition index across the city. There are other projects that do not affect that. We can go work on our alleys, we can work on our city parking lots, we can perform curb and gutter and sidewalk repairs. None of this work helps improve our PCIs, but it is still necessary work that we do year in and year out. So these are what we would call non-pavement management program work, because they don't affect the quality of the street network as far as our ratings are concerned. So we always have requests in the budget every year for these types of projects to go along with those pavement management related projects. So you'll see here, you know, again at first blush, I don't think this number will stay this big. We have a lot of other CIP needs this year. We've already talked with Finance Officer Bob Zien and Manager Mack about these requests and the likelihood to need to redact some of these monies because of the other CIP projects that are competing for funds in the 212 budget. So anyway, I just wanted to, if you're surprised this doesn't come in this high at budget time, that's the likelihood because of the competing funds for these dollars. Namely, several facility needs that we've got going on that could likely end up impacting these requests. These are some other miscellaneous requests, again, that occur but aren't related to the pavement management system. And some of these I just wanted to provide, Justin provided in here, I wanted to keep in here just to give you a heads up on. We do owe the DOT for Highway 212 storm sewer work. Once we get billed for that, that'll have to come out of our budgets. We're looking at implementing a storm sewer master plan, a drainage study that would assess our entire storm sewer system. I don't know if we'll get money in there yet for 23, but that's something on our radar. Big Sioux flood control project, we've talked about that. There's the potential for funding needs in the future budgets for that. 14th Avenue Bridge replacement, that is in the county's jurisdiction. If you think of the bridge going over the Big Sioux River on 14th Avenue, the county has that programmed and have received a bridge improvement grant from the state. They'll be reconstructing that, but have asked for partnering funding from the city in order to widen it to what we would expect to see an appropriate bridge width for our future city growth. So we've got money earmarked for those improvements coming up here in the next couple of years. This last slide, well, second to last slide, is a snapshot of our street maintenance ops. A lot of this other stuff I would consider engineering related, even though Rob certainly works closely with us on it. Pavement design, pavement rehab, the pavement management system. But this dives specifically into Rob's operations out at the street division. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because another part of the budget here that's related to our street maintenance that you'll be seeing perhaps, depending on where the city manager's recommendations fall, is that Rob and I have recommended to add 2 new street maintenance staff to his crew. Why would we be recommending that? Well, we wanted to give some data behind our thoughts on that. And this chart, this graph or table here simply represents some of the comparatives that we're looking at. Really what it boils down to for Rob and I when we talked about this is just the need for the boots on the ground staff to do some of those maintenance repairs that we cited earlier on in the study, the pothole repairs, some of the crack sealing, some of the shouldering and things like that that help prevent edge cracking on our streets. The more staff we have to cover the ground on that, the better off we are in putting to rest some of those functional distresses that we see on a lot of our roads. And we oftentimes hear about for good reason from the traveling public. So the summary, so the street division staff, we looked at Watertown's current numbers. We're currently at 15. Now that includes the superintendent, the foreman, administrative staff, 11 operators, and 1 traffic safety employee. Watertown back in 1970 had about 10 street division staff. And that's going off recollection and records that we could find the best information on. The reason we point this out is I'll show you on the next diagram here the stark difference in the streets that we've covered from 1970 to now. The city of Aberdeen, they have a street division staff of about 21. Mitchell at 15 and a half. They have a part-timer in there. Yankton at 14. Brookings at 14. Centerline miles of streets. These include the state highways that run through each and every one of these communities. So the city of Watertown, we have 183 miles, centerline miles, not lane miles, but centerline miles of streets that we maintain. Back in 1970, we only had 97. So, you know, we've almost doubled our street network since 1970. and only increased our staff, at 50%, five new staff since then. Aberdeen is a comparative. They maintain about 157 miles of streets. Mitchell 135, Yankton only 104, and Brookings only 108. So you can see we're the highest on this list for comparable communities in the state. And if you look at the three most comparable employee level wise, we're sitting at the bottom end with the lower level of streets being maintained. Land area, this is the square miles within the city limits for each one of these communities. The reason that's an important factor is not only does the street division maintain the street network, they're also looking at our storm sewer system. Generally speaking, the larger land area a community has within their city limits, the more storm sewers network they have to maintain as well. That includes all of our open channels, our waterways, our concrete channels, our storm sewer, our inlets, and all those things. So this land area that the street division helps keep maintained falls at 27 square miles in Watertown. Now, obviously we are unique that we've got a large lake within those numbers. Aberdeen's sitting just shy of 16, Mitchell at a little over 12, and Brookings at a little over 13. This is that map that Rob put together. We went back to 1970 to show the city limits from 1970. Those are in the yellow. So that would be the boundary of city limits back in 1970. And the street network that was included within them is pretty much what it looks like today, I would assume, for the most part. And then the green or the teal area, that is our 2020 city limits. That's a very interesting diagram, I feel, that shows how we've expanded the street network and some new residential subdivisions. We've annexed a lake street network all around the lake and portions of the north side of Lake Pelican, and continue to grow, which is a great thing. So this just helps put it in perspective of the growth we've seen in those last 50 years. With that, that wraps up my presentation, and I know Rob and Justin, again, they put a lot of work into this. I can't thank them enough to compiling this data and for the work that we collectively get to do year in and year out as we help make recommendations for street network repairs. With that, we'll stand by for any questions, comments, anything the council might have.
Thank you very much. Chair will open it up for questions and comments. Councilman Paulson.
Thank you, Reed, or Mayor Reed, Olin. As the council knows and the staff knows, I do also have some expertise in this, and that was a great overview. I think people have to realize that we actually do have good streets here. I recently had family from Kansas in town, and they mentioned how good our streets were compared to where they've been, and they travel quite a bit. Especially coming from Kansas, but they've been, through many other states, and they just got back from Europe, and they went out of their way. This was not a conversation I started, but they mentioned how good our streets were, and that goes to the staff, not just the engineering, but Rob and the street department do an excellent job. And working with them for a few years, I know how hard they work, and the staffing, I know, has always been an issue, and hopefully we can help address that here in the near future. But I think people are just looking at one or two roads, and then they make comments on how bad our roads are, and that's not a fair judgment of our street system at all. We've put a lot of time and effort and money and resources in general into this community, especially recently, to make it better. And unfortunately, we do have some streets that we're replacing way sooner than the life expectancy. But since Heath has came on, we have new design standards. We've looked at that extensively, and with that comes compaction requirements, a new street section standard, and all that is only going to improve our streets going forward. We just have to make sure that we have the staffing that makes sure that developers and construction companies are following those standards. I want the public to know that fixing roads is a regressive tax on our community. So when we get the constant feedback from our community that why would you spend money on something else and not just fix our roads? Well, we have to move forward. We have to spend money to make this community grow. And fixing roads, we never get anything out of that. And it's obviously a necessity. We're putting the resources necessary to that, but we can't spend every dime we have fixing roads. It's regressive in nature. And to those people, I want to say the alternate really is a frontage assessment, and no one in this community wants that. And, you know, we've had our feedback on that, and, you know, that's the only way to actually get enough funding to fix every single road to their standards. And I just want people to know that's not something we're looking at right now, but that is the alternate if people really could keep complaining about streets.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions? Councilman Danforth.
You know, we talk about dollars because it certainly comes about from a standpoint of budget. But it'd be interesting, Heath, if we actually broke that number down into some point of like distance, because our cost today is significantly higher than it was a year or 2 years ago. So as I look at those numbers and say, okay, if we just simply, if the cost stayed stagnant, then those numbers are relative, or not relative, they are pertinent to the discussion. But when we know that the costs have went up, we're not going to get the same distance of roads repaired, which is going to have an impact on those numbers as your percentages and your PCI numbers. Because if we simply go, I'm just as an example, if it's the 233 one year, but it's cost you 458 the next year, let's just say that the price doubles. Well, you're not going to achieve those numbers as far as percentages. You're not going to. So it'd be interesting to know, you know, really how do we equate that information to blocks or some noted distance that we can relate to. Just a comment. The question is, do we by chance, are you able to take the data that you've collected for, you know, your determination of the road quality, and have you been able to break that down by, if we broke Watertown down into 5 quadrants, you know, lake being one, and then northeast, southeast, whatever those are. Is it broken down at all by some area, or is it just all the data together?
It's I'm pulling up a map here, and I don't know if this will help answer your question, Councilman Danforth, but we have, every road is mapped by its condition throughout the city, so we can see where the red roads are, which are the poor ones, and where the green roads are, which are the good ones, and they're all on our GIS map. We built that layer into our GIS map. I think actually Councilman Paulson maybe helped do that when he was working with the city, with our friends over at First District. So we do have a map representation of the condition of the streets. It's a useful tool, so you know we can take a look at it from a mapping standpoint.
But we don't break down the, what'd you call it, PCI number? Is that right?
No, not on a
area.
Not
it's
on
just
a
an
per area.
aggregate, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Because in just an observation, I know we've got areas in town where we've got roads that are bad all over the place. But it seems like, for whatever reason, I'm going to say the northeast part of town, that the longevity of those roads, they're terrible up there, but are they any worse than certain other areas? Well, probably not. It just seems like they don't last up there. And is that a function of the water table up there? Is it a function of what Colin had mentioned, our design and build standards? What is it about Northeast Watertown that those roads just don't seem to last?
Yeah, correct. what you mentioned there are exactly some of the factors. And here's that map I was referring to. Look at the northeast. There's a lot of red up here, right? These streets aren't that old. I think that what we're seeing is a combination or a culmination of things. One, back when these subdivisions were developed, we didn't have the engineering design standards that we have in place today. Having an adequate layer of base course, for example, to make sure that that pavement section keeps the water drained down and away from the pavement surface is a very important part of a street section. We have a minimum foot base course requirement in our design standards today. We've tore into some of these streets to rebuild them, and we found anywhere from 0 to 9 inches of gravel instead of the 12 inches we require today, as an example. So upholding those design standards here forward are going to be very, very important for the community to see these streets last through the duration that we would expect them to. The high groundwater in this area is definitely a factor. Again, that's where other components of the street section come into play. We've been putting in a lot of edge drain on 12th Avenue Northeast here that we just reconstructed this year. We installed edge drain. What is that? That's drain tile that's at the edge of the base course underneath that pavement. So again, as that water comes up into that pavement section, that gravel lets it drain over to these plastic drain tile pipes, and it gets that water ran down into our storm sewer system, and it keeps the pavement dry. And one of the simplest ways, I think it might have been in that graduate class actually, the professor said the 3 worst enemies of any pavement section or the 3 most important drainage or design factors are drainage, drainage, and drainage. You got to keep that moisture away from being underneath that pavement section in order for it to get its full useful life out of it. So those are the things we've been working on as we've worked through some of these street repairs up in that area.
Thank you. Councilman Bueller?
Thank you, Mayor. How much involvement do we have in the trail system, the recreational trails? Are we taxed with some of that work as well?
Yes, Councilman Bueller. Again, probably just because of my interests, I've been plugging in with Rob and Justin more and more each year with Park and Recs. Now, Park and Rec Department manage the trail system for the city, which is appropriate, obviously, for obvious reasons. But really, what a lot of our pathways are miniature streets. And so helping them with the level of knowledge we have with asphalt maintenance and things like that, we're not opposed to. There are partnering separate department, but definitely an important piece of infrastructure and asset to the community. So long story short is, yes, we've been plugging in more and more and trying to find out ways on how to make that more systematic to plug them into the pavement management program that we're otherwise looking at through our street network.
Follow up?
Thanks. A couple more things. The other one, I guess, is as far as maintenance goes, do the Park and Rec folks rely on us for testing and evaluating and assessing the trail system and how we make repairs to that?
By and large, in the recent past, well, since I've been here, Park and Rec Department will hire their own contractors to go perform maintenance services to the trail system. Now, once in a while, Rob could speak to this, but once in a while, Street Division will go out and help them with some minor patchwork or repair work. But if it's something of a larger magnitude, they'll hire their own contractors and go out and see that work done.
Thank you. And then just one more question, and you may have shown it and I didn't see it, but the question is, like say a neighborhood street, an asphalt neighborhood street, what's a typical lifespan, life expectancy for something like that?
Well, you used to, I would say in today's standards, we would hope to get about a 30-year life out of our streets. Some of them we're only seeing 15, unfortunately, so about half what we would expect that we've had to reconstruct lately. But that's a fairly good rule of thumb, is if you're getting 30 years out of your pavement, you're doing something right as far as the life cycle and applying those maintenance applications at an appropriate amount of time.
Councilman Vilhauer?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to compliment our staff, echo what Councilman Paulson said, but also how responsive you guys are. Just as an example, just yesterday, as you know, I sent the three of you, and I copied City Manager Mack, an email, a couple street concerns, and you all three responded to me very timely, and I appreciate that. So I want to compliment you and just in general the job that you guys do. Just a few questions. One, I'd like to echo what Councilman Bueller just said about the trail system. You know, living at the lake or representing Ward E, around, which includes the lake, the trail system around there, I get a lot of complaints and compliments too, but complaints primarily, more so than compliments. So that is something that definitely needs our attention. So anyway, just enough on the trails. Question I've got about the pavement management system. You do that every 4 to 5 years, right?
Yeah, correct. That update is important so that we have the most accurate information at hand every year.
I guess, you know, my comment is, to me, a street is almost, to me, it looks like almost a living, breathing organism that can change literally overnight. I mean, you're relying upon this, and to me, it seemed like as you get in that second, third, fourth year, especially if you're going 5 years, and you get down that second, third, fourth year, is a pavement management system score or rating even worth that much to you anymore at that point? Because it can change so fast from one year to the next, or even from the course of 1 year even.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair question to ask in regards to the changes that could occur over that time. So what I could say to that is, and one of the reasons I pulled up this slide, we try to keep these projects and these dollar amounts not necessarily tied and locked in with any one roadway. We used to budget that way, where we'd list a specific street for X dollars, like 14th, for example, that just happened a couple years ago. We don't know from year in, year out if that street is going to change, so we try to keep it general in title on where we're going to be working until we get closer into the bid season and then the construction season next year. But what we do want to lock into these numbers. Now, when you get into year 3 or 4, those changes, I would say, yeah, they compound, they grow, so it becomes a little more unknown year to year. But I would also say that the report we get is pretty well put together, where every street is listed in there with this recommended surface treatment, reconstruct, whatever it might be. And using that list, we don't go by that list black and white and say, okay, year 1, we got to do streets A, B, and C because the report says so. Year 2, same thing. We use our boots on the ground, our observations year in and year out. We say, okay, we got to shuffle these around a little bit. The report's a great tool, but it is definitely a fluid document that we fluctuate from year to year based on exactly what you're saying.
Okay. A couple more questions. Thanks for that explanation, Public Works Director Von Eye. Let's say the dollars were, we had unlimited dollars or whatever we need. Do we have the resources out there, the materials, the contractor, that could do what we need to have done or could pay for?
The reason I pulled up this slide, because our report actually addresses that scenario. One of the scenarios is the fix everything budget. Well, that's $41.4 million a year over 5 years. So obviously that's a little bit out of reach. So the maximum scenario to get all our streets up to a 90 plus pavement condition index. Sorry, somebody pick Kristen up out of her chair, please. But it's just entertaining and informative to see what that does look like. That's never anything we would strive for, but it's just neat information to have. I'm sorry, I lost my thought on your exact answer you were looking for, Council.
I guess I was asking, I mean, do we have the contractors and the materials out there that if dollars were not limiting what could be done? I mean, is it possible to get these projects done?
Yeah, I would say that's always speculative from year to year. Some years we see more interest than others on varying or differing contractors. This year, Justin, could you speak to, I mean, have we turned down had to not do any projects because we didn't get bids? I think it was all more budgetarily driven when we didn't do something.
Okay.
because we had to shuffle funds around to other projects because of overruns.
Okay. And then we just one question. You said something that sparked my attention, referencing the 14th Avenue Bridge. That yes, that's a county road or a county bridge that we are looking at co-oping with the county on that. I'm not quite sure how to phrase this question without offending our neighbors around us. But I mean, we've got also, because I've had this question posed to me, and we've got township roads that are used quite heavily by, people coming and going to Watertown in and out. I mean, what is our policy? Are we going down potentially a slippery slope if we're now co-oping with another entity when all of a sudden we've got all these other roads that we might be having the same request made of us? Or what? Just a comment, if you might, along those lines.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the differing factors here with this particular project, it relates to the oversizing of that bridge that's upon our request. The county came to us and said, hey, we're going to rebuild this bridge. We could do it same width, size, shape it is right now today. What say you, city? Do you guys want us to widen it? Do you want us to put sidewalk or pedestrian access on the sides of it? And we said yes and yes to both, because we know 14th is a primary east-west arterial in our street network on the north side of town. We did not want them to build a bridge that 20 years down the road we were wishing we had them widen. So really it's because we're requesting them to build it better, design and build it bigger, that we would cost share in that to help pick up that additional cost and overruns for them.
So there is a logical explanation as to why we are co-oping or cost sharing in this project.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Tupper.
Thank you, Mayor. You mentioned the construction standards have changed dramatically in the last however many years. And if, I think it was Councilman Danforth and Paulson both mentioned the northeast part of town, where we see a lot of premature wear and tear on roads. I think there was a lot of not construction management or maintenance, or I shouldn't say maintenance, however, it was standards were less. What are we doing to make sure that, because we got a lot of new developments going on in town. What are we making sure that the developers are standing up to those standards, other than just having them? I mean, that's something on a book. What are we doing to make sure that those standards are being met?
Yes. The simplest way to explain that is, well, there's a couple things. One is our development process. We're holding fast to a systematic process that we review the design, we approve and permit the public infrastructure going into every subdivision. Once that's approved, we then try our best with the staff, the manpower, the bandwidth that we have, to have staff out there on site to perform random inspections. I can't say that we're systematically out there for this and that phase of their work, but we certainly try to be, and we have a presence as much as we can. As that construction winds down, as the developer's done building that public infrastructure, they are responsible for the development agreement to contact the city, notify us of the completion. And then the other thing that we've gotten really good at in that process is going through a completion inspection. We actually pull not just engineering staff, but utility staff, street maintenance staff. We look at the storm sewers. We look at the water department of utilities, checks off the water system. We look at the sanitary sewer. We look at the curb and gutter, all those things. And we certify, yes, it's complete, not only done out there in the field, but complete according to the plans that were approved. And I think that's a big check off that we'd missed in years past, where we simply, and I can only speculate why we weren't or weren't doing it the way we were. But this process I've seen in other communities and I've used personally in other communities that I know works very well. As long as you have that check off at the end, you're certifying things complete, you're going through that 1-year warranty period, you're coming back at that 1-year warranty, again inspecting it for any warranty repairs that need to be done, and then formally accepting it as public infrastructure.
Are those standards, is some of those are future, are a lot of those going to require the drainage pipe? Or is that by area?
In our current design standards, we do not require an edge drain, but on a per review basis, if we know there's a high groundwater presence, we are requiring that developers put that in, or provide a thicker base course section, or some other means or alternative design so that we know we're getting a good street section.
So that would be a work between your department or the city departments and the developer to agree to the original, probably the original plan.
Correct. Yeah.
Mayor, one more question.
Please.
This is for Councilman Vilhauer. When are you going to write us that check for $45 million so we can fix them?
I think I think that would be he could write it, but whether or not it would bounce. Any further, Councilman Danforth?
Yeah. A little while ago, now this is private citizen Danforth talking here. A little while ago, I had some work being done on a property that I own, and Rob Bainan came out and we were just talking and looking at some things. And we just in general started talking about what the capability and capacity is of the street department to effectively play about, what role do they actually play in maintaining our streets, physically maintaining them. And obviously the big projects we don't do, but the some of the stuff, like some of the patchwork, quality patchwork and such, there was really some concerns with that from the standpoint of capacity and supply of material. We're subject, when it comes to real asphalt versus the cold stuff that you pack in there, we can't produce that ourselves. We have to buy that. And I think this year that they open up quite late compared to normal. So we're subject to that. So I guess a question I have is what really is our role? I'm talking about Rob's department now. What is our role? What's our capability and our capacity to perform a level of maintenance on our streets ourselves versus being dependent on outside contractors and, I'm going to say, asphalt supply? What do we have for a capability, and what is our role? Because I'm a firm believer that we use outside sources, but it really does seem like when it comes to street repair, and I'm talking about minor street repair, that it seems like we're just so subjected to the few months that we get in the summer and the contractors and when they want to open and close the asphalt production, whatever they call it. It just seems like we may need to take a look at some further capability to do that ourselves to a greater extent than we do. So you know where I'm coming from on this. Where are we at with that as far as where do we see ourselves? What role do we actually play with that?
Yeah, I could provide a couple comments, and if Rob wants to chime in when I'm done here. But I think, Councilman Danforth, really there's three components to that. One, you touched on material availability. That's something we have been struggling with locally to have asphalt materials available. Rob's crews in the street division have had to frequently drive to Brookings to buy from a different asphalt plant rather than our local one right here in our backyard. That's simply based on their business plan, how they operate. I can't fault them for those things. That's their business to run. But it does tie our hands as far as material availability. We just don't have asphalt readily available like we would like to see it year in and year out. The second component to that is our equipment. Rob's crews are a little bit limited to how big of a street patch they can perform, for example. We don't have a full-size paver. We don't have a mini paver. We've contemplated and may put in a budget request at some point for a mini paver. And what that would do then is help broaden our horizon on the approach we can take on some of these patches that are needed on our streets and not have to wait for a contractor to come perform it at usually a much higher cost. Some of the things we've done in the recent past to help with that, Rob's looking at lease rates for crack seal equipment, machinery, to lease those out rather than buying one. We've recently have in our budget this year that's on order is buying a oil distribution tank, which allows us to put hot oil in a tank and keep it hot so we can use it for miscellaneous street treatment projects that we need it for. We've got a chip spreader as part of our recent budget where we can provide some of that oil and chip on some of our street surfaces ourselves. We're not going to do a full-blown, quadrant of town chip seal by any means with our internal forces, but we can do some things with those resources. Then the third component, so you have materials, equipment. The third component is the staffing. And that's really what this slide comes back to, is those 2 additional full-time employee requests coming in 23. We can only do so much with the people we have, obviously. And between the street maintenance aspect, but also the storm water maintenance aspect, you've all noticed Rob's crew's been working on some of our open channel maintenance here the last couple of years. We've been mucking a lot of sediment out of our open channels that accumulates over time as the storm water flows. Very important, but often takes a back seat and falls down the list of things that they're able to do based on the staff that they have available and the time they have to do it in. With that, Rob, your thoughts on any of that?
I think he covered most of it, really, but I think one of our biggest obstacles right now is getting mix in a timely fashion. When we do have to make a trip to Brookings, a round trip will take 3 hours, down back and get to our location to dump it. But I think we're approaching right around 50 round trips this year so far. So that is our biggest obstacle at the moment. Of course, farming stuff out on a bigger scale, I think is good right now as far as equipment, having the equipment and manpower. Certain things such as paving, just the equipment for paving, a large paver and large roller and then a staff to do it is a whole different animal than just patching, like we're talking the smaller patching. But we have talked extensively about a small paver, just a mini basically, that would run anywhere from 8 to 13 foot wide. So a guy could do some large patches quicker. When we do large patches right now, it's all by hand. We do put the material in with skid steers, but they smooth it all out by hand and use what's called a lute. It's 3 foot wide, and it's all with the eye. So it takes a lot of work. But yeah, we're not set up to do anything real big. Like he said, we're looking into rentals of certain type of equipment. For example, like crack sealing. One of the best times to crack seal is in an open winter when there's no snow on the ground or on the road and the cracks are wide. That's a good time to do it, and we're looking at things like that. But yeah, if we could get mix regularly, that would really help us a lot.
Any further questions or comments? Councilman Vilhauer.
Thank you, Mayor. So say, this is very helpful information. Can you send this out to us and we'll be out there for the public too, on the website too, if they want to take a look at this?
Yes, absolutely. We can do both.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments? Chair would like to say something. As I always wait for everyone else to have their say. I just want to say I'm very proud of the work that Rob and his crew does for the city, but also the upstairs in the engineering department and all the work that is done there to prepare, because it takes a team to make this happen, and that teamwork also includes the council for advocating the funds. I think sometimes I muse that people talking about road conditions in South Dakota is similar to people talking about the weather, that they just want something in common to talk about, and very rarely do people talk happy thoughts. I'm not saying that there isn't some truth in complaining about the roads, but when you see that our PCI is at 65, which is at the very top end of the national average, you can see that if someone is constantly complaining about the conditions of the roads, and then they just use the blanket statement of, oh, Watertown's roads are terrible. Well, the truth is probably all roads are not terrible, as the PCI index proves. It probably just means the road that they drive most often is not up to their standards. I understand that, because if you're driving over a pothole every day and you've got a nice sports car, you're going to not be happy. I get that. But the truth is, and what I liked about your presentation, is that the numbers by an outside factor that grades the entire nation prove that Watertown, South Dakota is doing a pretty good job about this. Another thing that I very much liked about this presentation is the comparison between us and some of the other communities. Now, originally, early on in your presentation, I was going to ask about how Watertown's pavement condition index ranked compared to other towns in our surrounding area. And then I started thinking, after more slides came up, that what does it matter? I've always stressed, whenever anyone always says it's like, well, Brookings does this or Aberdeen is like this. I don't care. Watertown just needs to focus on Watertown and be the best city that we can be. I don't care about what Brookings is doing. It's a different city. We are our own entity, and those numbers about like our roads, the miles of roads, the actual miles of the city of Watertown prove that we have a lot more that we have to deal with than these other communities have to. So if people are complaining about Watertown versus another surrounding town, it is not comparing like reality. It is not apples to apples, because our reality is different than theirs. And I very much like the presentation for proving that. So I just want to stress to everyone, as I always do, let's just be the best Watertown we can be, and I think that we're well on our way, and we've already been doing a pretty good job. So thank you, and thank the council for everything. So without hearing anything more, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any future council items to be read?
Not this time.
Not at this time. Is there anyone here for a public comment? I don't see anyone, so I'll close public comment. We do have a need to go into an executive session pursuant to SDCL 125-2. We will be discussing contractual matters, and we will not be taking action when we are done. So the chair will entertain a motion to go into executive session. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Danforth. Excuse me. Any comments on that? Hearing none, the motion is to go into executive session. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. We are in executive session.